Linda Baker, and I'm here at Cheap Joe's in Boone, North Carolina, and I want to show you the process of pouring. For some of you that know my work, you may know that I pour and I use layering, and I get a lot of email questions of how do you pour, how do you make it work, and so I just thought I would come and show you a little bit of my process, how I go about it. So I start with a value sketch. Very important to me to work out my lights and my mids and my darks on a value sketch. So that's where I will start. And I can tell you, if you don't love your value sketch, you will not love your painting. Don't think that you can take a drawing that looks so-so and think, well, I'll fix it in the painting, because when you get with all that color on your paper, all of that sort of goes out of your head. So the more planning you do in the beginning, the better chance you're going to have, I think, of coming up with something that you like. So having said that, then what I generally do, because I work in layers, I like to have a roadmap of my work. So instead of drawing it right on my paper, which I did in the beginning, and then about 3 layers into my process, I would realize that I had lost my drawing and that I could not see where I was supposed to go, and then my painting changed dramatically. So I will draw on a piece of vellum. Joe has quite a few different kinds of vellum, but this one's an extra heavy. So the heavier you get your tracing paper or your vellum, the better chance you're going to have with it. And then I tend to tape it around the edges with white artist tape that they sell in different widths, because then it has a little bit of stability and I can use it again and again and again if I want to. The nice thing about doing this is that you've worked out everything to do with your drawing, and if you don't love the painting, a lot of the work is done and you can always repaint it, or you can repaint it in a different color, a different season, or different ways, or different portions of it, or that kind of thing. So I like it when I have a drawing of my paintings. So once I get my drawing finished and have put it on this vellum, then I will use a sheet of graphite paper, and I just pull it across and then draw directly onto my paint surface. Nice thing to do here is that if you tape down the edges, if you cut your graphite paper to the size that you're working, and then you tape one of the edges, you can always pick up both the graphite paper and your drawing, and you can see if you've missed any lines. I see a lot of people that pick a big piece of graphite paper and they're drawing in the center, and then they can't figure out whether they've got lines, and they take it off and they're missing some of the more important lines of your drawing. So it's nice to be able to go back and look at your drawing as you're doing this. I won't do it for you, I just wanted to show you how I go about that process. So once I get it onto my paper, then the next thing I'm going to do is mask, put the masking on. And in this case, all I've done is mask a little bit of the highlights of what I want to be the absolute white of my paper. Lately, sometimes I don't even put any masking on. I will put a tone on my paper first and then put my masking on the tone, so that when you take the masking off, you don't have those stark white areas to deal with. But in this case, I have masked out just a little bit, and I'm going to demonstrate for you how I would pour with American Journey paints onto this paper. These are American Journey paints. They're my absolute favorite for pouring. They are professional grade, they have a nice consistency, and one of the things I like about them is that they mix up very nicely. You get a very smooth mixture. If you have poured and used different brands of paints, not all paints end up with this nice liquid mixture to them. Sometimes they fall apart, or they're grainy, or they're lumpy, and these really make a nice consistent pouring. I have different colored brushes in each of my colors of paint, because I don't want to use the same brush in each one and contaminate them. I want the paint to mix on the paper. And so I am literally going to pour it onto the paper, just like it says. So I have laid down some paper towel. This is a messy process. If I were home working in my studio, I would have my paint board up a little bit, and I put a tray right here. And the tray is like a wallpaper tray that you get at one of the big box stores. Or if I've got enough room, a big utility tub works nice to pour. You can put your painting right in the middle of the utility tub and pour right there. One of the reasons I use these containers is because I want to keep the paint. When I pour it on the paper, I want to reserve whatever paint is left over because I will use it again. And when these colors mix, they make the most gorgeous grays. And sometimes I will do a whole painting with just the residue that's left over from the lights to the... Every gray turns out different because it's always a different blend or a different mixture of basically the primaries of red, yellow, and blue. I recommend, especially as a beginning pouring student, that you use the primaries, use a red, yellow, and blue, because as you know, all colors are made from red, yellow, and blue, so you have the possibility of every color known to man. And then I've also mixed up a little bit of indigo because that gives it a little deeper, richer color if that's what you intend to do. Often I don't use the indigo in the beginning. I'll use the indigo more toward the end of my paintings when I have several layers already on a piece. So having said that, I don't pour on dry paper because if you do, the paint just goes in one little splat unless that's what you're looking for. I have done that a little bit if I was going to do something abstract or something non-objective, but for the most part, if I'm trying to create something, I want that paint to flow over my paper. And the paint flows over your paper through water. Water is the transportation for the paint. And a lot of artists don't understand that you don't just mix a little bit of water with your paint to put on your paper. You actually have to have your brush wet enough for the paint to flow on the water. So if you have trouble with your paintings looking a little too stiff and a little too starchy, you might want to wet your little sections with clear water and then drop the paint into them, and you'll get a better blend. But that's sort of what I'm doing on a big scale here. So I have two ways of applying water. This is something I have that's kind of a treat to me. These are Cheap Joe's Golden Fleece. I love these brushes. But I have a 2 and a 3 inch here, and these are used just for clear water. They've never been in paint because, as you know, when you go to run a wash, that whatever the last color your brush was in, you're going to get a little residue of that. So when you go to wet your paper to put your paint on, it already is either a little gray or a little blue or a little yellow or whatever. And I want this to be clear. I want the paint to do all the work. So I have two brushes, and I know it's a little bit decadent, but I have two brushes that are designated just to clear water. So the other thing I would do to wet the surface is I would spritz. If I were going to do something like more landscapey and I wanted it to look more textured, I would spritz my paper. If I want it to look more smooth and more zen, then I will wet my paper. So those are the two ways that you can get the fluid on the paper, on the surface. So I'm just going to go right across. I use a lot of water. I go across the paper once and I dip back in. I go again. And when people, in my students that I have in my workshops, they'll get in there, they'll wet the brush once and then they start scrubbing their paper. You don't want to do that because what you're going to do then is disturb the sizing underneath. And I actually want the paint to work in the sizing. And the other thing I'm doing is that you'll notice I have a very, very gentle touch. No scrubbing, very gentle touch with my brush, because I don't want to disturb the fibers of the paper. I want the paint to set right on the surface as I pour it. So as I pour it, and I can show you a couple different ways of working with this. I guess I only have 2 pipettes here. Usually I have 3. I can either pour it directly from the container or I can pipette it on for more control. So I'm going to start with pouring, and I'm going to mix it up one last time. And because I have a horizontal subject matter here, I'm going to pour at a little bit of a diagonal because that offers just another little bit of an element. And I'm going to pour it right across the paper. I generally start with yellow. Yellow is the hardest for the paper to hold. So I will often start with yellow and end with yellow. But next I will do a little bit of red. That's probably more red than I wanted. Way more than I wanted. And I'm going to end with a little bit of blue. This blue is pretty strong, so I'm just going to try to do just a little bit. Oh, see, that's quite a bit. So having said that, especially as a beginning pourer, you freak out at all the color that hits your paper, and you're like, oh my gosh, what to do with it. But you can see how nice and smooth the American Journey paint is. And it's not lumpy. And so now the colors are just sort of playing together. Now normally, as I've mentioned, I would have a tray down here. And also I use the finger brush a little bit to get some areas that the masking maybe didn't allow. But very, very gentle, almost no pressure. I don't usually use a brush because I don't want the fibers to hurt the paper. So, whoops, got a little area up here that didn't get it either. Now, the reason I had so many areas that didn't get it is because I didn't really put quite enough water on with my brush. I am now pouring it. Let me pour it toward you so that you can see it. And this is a very strong, very strong pour for a first pour. I don't worry about the back of my paper. That's not important to me. So now that I have this much, I'm going to go back and try to establish a little bit more of the yellows. So you can see the pipettes. These are pipettes from Cheap Joe's. They offer you a great deal of control. And now I can sort of play a little bit with my color. And if I decide that the color is a little stronger than I want it to be, which this is a little stronger than I thought it would be, I can always spritz it with clear water and soften it back down. So I think I'm going to do that a little bit because it's a little stronger. I'll do it toward you again. I forget that you're out there. Usually I'm doing it toward me. So let me spray this down just a little bit more, and then we will add a little bit more red back into it. That blue is really, really powerful. So let's take our pipette. Let's go in here with some red. And on a diagonal. See, the thing is, you don't have to be in a hurry. You can take as much time as you want with this, and you can have a lot of fun. Let's add a little bit more yellow in again. And the thing is, you can't really plan how they're going to come out, and that's part of the fun. You sort of end up going with what you get. I'm kind of liking that a little bit. And remember that things dry lighter than when they go on. People will pour on just a little bit of color, and when it dries, it all disappeared, and they're like, oh, what happened to my painting? I think this will end up being a nice first pour, and it's probably darker than you expected it to be. So I'm glad you're getting to see it so that you'll know when you go to try it. Now I mop up my edges with tissue, not paper towel. I want something that's just going to be very soft. I don't want to get onto the edge of my paper and pull my paint off. If I were to get too close to the edge, it would suck up all the paint, and then I would have even a lighter painting when it dried. So I'm just mopping up my edges. I'm using 300-pound Kilimanjaro paper. I like the Kilimanjaro paper. For one thing, it doesn't have quite as stiff a sizing as some of the other papers, and it works very well for pouring and for layering because the paint goes into the fibers so nicely. So you can see I will keep mopping up the edges until all the paint has sort of calmed down a little bit. Now if I got some paint in the middle of my paper that I wasn't happy with, if I had a puddle, I would do what I call wick it up. And I would just take the edge, just the corner of my tissue, and I will show you as if I were going to do one. I didn't end up with a puddle anywhere here, but if I had a puddle, I would just come down and touch it with the corner, and then the corner would wick the paint up into the tissue. Because you don't want puddles. If you leave puddles, they will dry and you will get blooms. And they tend to show up along the edges where next to the tape, and that's not where you would like your bloom to be. Having said that, I have a painting that I could show you that the whole beauty of it was what happened with the blooms, and I will do that in just a second here. Okay. I'm about to the point of cleaning this up and letting it dry. When you're using 300-pound paper, I really recommend that you let it set overnight. So how I generally work in my studio is that I'll go in the morning and I will mask. Maybe I work on as many as 10 pieces at once. So I will mask different ones, and then in the afternoon I pour them, and then I let them all set overnight. And then before I go to bed, I will go up and I will turn them upside down, so that when I come up in the morning, they're all upside down. And I had a friend come to my studio and she said, "Why are all your paintings upside down?" I said, "They're being disciplined." But the truth is, when I come up in the morning, I don't want to see them. I want to see them for the first time. So I'll pick one up off the floor and I'll put it on the easel and I'll walk back and I turn around and look at it. And that's the closest I'm going to come to seeing that painting for the first time. And so I think it's really important as we self-critique our work to be able to see it as fresh as possible. So they're really not being disciplined. I don't seem to have any control over anything, including my paper. Here's a painting that I did before, but one of the things that was really nice on it is that these wonderful little blossomy areas here that sort of look like fireworks, I think you could call it the 4th of July, that is from puddles sitting there. And I was working on this painting in a workshop, and I had walked away from it because my demo was over and I was over helping students or whatever, so I wasn't monitoring it, and I did not come back and I did not wick up the puddles. But these puddles actually ended up to be in kind of a beautiful place, and so I've just left them and let them be part of the painting. If you got blooms all the way around the edge and you didn't love them, they will tend to disappear with your next layer of masking and paint. But these were some blooms that I thought worked out kind of nice, and so I kept them. So anyway, that is the first step of a first pour on a subject. So thank you very much.